Some disappearances leave behind questions that eat away at you for years. They create holes in reality that never quite close, no matter how many times you examine the evidence or replay the footage. I've worked hotel security for 17 years across 4 different properties, and I thought I'd seen everything. Drunken arguments, medical emergencies, the occasional theft. But nothing in my career prepared me for what happened to Sarah Chen in February of 2013. My name is Marcus Webb, and I was the night security supervisor at the Riverside Grand Hotel in Seattle when Sarah vanished. I've told this story to police detectives, private investigators, journalists, and Sarah's family more times than I can count. Every time I go through the details, I hope I'll remember something new, some small clue that everyone missed. But the facts remain stubbornly the same, as impossible and disturbing now as they were that cold winter night. The Riverside Grand was a 15-story hotel built in the 1960s, the kind of place that had seen better days but maintained enough charm to attract tourists and business travelers. We had 240 rooms, a restaurant that served breakfast until 11, and a bar that stayed open until 2 in the morning on weekends. The building had its quirks, as older buildings do: pipes that groaned in winter, elevators that sometimes got stuck between floors, doors that didn't quite hang straight in their frames. But it was a good place to work, and the staff felt like family after you'd been there a while. I knew every inch of that building, every blind spot in the camera coverage, every shortcut through the service corridors. That knowledge would haunt me later when I realized it hadn't been enough to help Sarah. Sarah Chen checked into the hotel on February 9th, 2013, a Saturday evening. She was 28 years old, a marketing consultant from Portland visiting Seattle for a conference. The front desk clerk who checked her in, a young woman named Jennifer, remembered Sarah being polite and professional. She had 1 suitcase, a laptop bag, and she asked about the hotel gym hours and the Wi-Fi password. Nothing about the interaction seemed unusual or memorable. Sarah was assigned room 1117 on the 11th floor, a standard queen room facing the city. Jennifer gave her 2 key cards, pointed her toward the elevators, and wished her a pleasant stay. It was 6:43 in the evening. Security footage shows Sarah walking across the lobby, pulling her suitcase behind her, her laptop bag slung over one shoulder. She's wearing jeans, a dark blue jacket, and white sneakers. Her long black hair is pulled back in a ponytail. She looks tired from travel but otherwise perfectly normal, just another guest heading to her room after a long day. The Riverside Grand had 4 elevators serving the guest floors. 3 were the original elevators from the 1960s, refurbished over the years but still showing their age. The 4th had been added in a renovation during the 80s and was slightly more modern. Sarah pressed the call button and waited. According to the timestamp on the lobby camera footage, she stood there for approximately 45 seconds before elevator 3 arrived. The doors opened and Sarah stepped inside, turning to face forward as the doors closed behind her. That lobby footage would become the most analyzed piece of video evidence in the entire case, examined frame by investigators looking for any clue about Sarah's state of mind or any indication of what was about to happen. But there's nothing. She looks like every other hotel guest at the end of a long travel day, ready to get to her room, maybe order room service, and get some rest. Here's where the story takes its first strange turn. The elevator Sarah entered should have taken approximately 30 to 40 seconds to reach the 11th floor. Our maintenance logs showed that all elevators were functioning normally that evening, but Sarah never arrived at the 11th floor. She never stepped out of that elevator. The internal elevator camera captured footage of Sarah's ride, and that video would become the center of an investigation that consumed 3 years of my life and still haunts my dreams. I've watched that footage hundreds of times, and I can describe every second from memory. Sarah stands in the back corner of the elevator, her suitcase beside her, looking at her phone. The elevator begins to ascend. You can see the floor numbers lighting up on the panel. 2, 3, 4. Sarah continues scrolling on her phone, occasionally glancing up at the floor indicator. 5, 6, 7. At floor 8, Sarah looks up from her phone and tilts her head slightly, as if hearing something. Her expression changes from neutral to puzzled. She takes a step forward and looks at the elevator panel more closely. This is where investigators would later spend countless hours analyzing her body language. Does she look concerned? Frightened? Confused? The truth is, she just looks slightly puzzled, the way you might look if you heard an odd noise or noticed something wasn't quite right. The elevator continues climbing. 9, 10. When the indicator reaches 11, the elevator doesn't stop. Sarah's puzzlement deepens. She reaches forward and presses the button for 11 again, more firmly this time. The elevator continues, past 11, 12, 13, 14. Sarah presses the 11 button several more times, then tries the door open button. Nothing happens. The elevator keeps rising. When it reaches 15, the top floor of guest rooms, it still doesn't stop. Sarah is now visibly concerned. She's no longer looking at her phone. Her full attention is on the elevator panel and the floor indicator. 15 passes. This is impossible because there is no 16th floor in the Riverside Grand. The building has 15 floors of guest rooms and a mechanical room on the roof accessed by service stairs, not elevators. The elevators are not programmed to go above 15. They physically cannot do so. The shaft doesn't extend higher than 15, but according to the footage and the elevator's internal computer log, which we checked later, the elevator kept climbing. The floor indicator showed 16, then 17, then 18. Sarah's concern has turned to obvious fear. She's pressing multiple buttons now, including the emergency call button. She tries to use her phone, presumably to call for help, but we're later told that cell service in the elevators was spotty at best. The footage shows her holding the phone up, trying to get a signal. Floor 19, 20. Sarah backs into the corner of the elevator, her eyes fixed on the floor indicator as it continues climbing past floors that don't exist. Her mouth is moving. She's either talking to herself or praying. At floor 23, something changes in the elevator. The lighting flickers. Sarah looks up at the ceiling, then back at the panel. The floor indicator continues climbing. 24, 25, 26. The lighting flickers again, more severely this time. For a brief moment, maybe 2 or 3 seconds, the camera loses picture entirely. When it comes back, Sarah is pressed into the corner, her hand over her mouth, staring at something off camera. Her eyes are wide with what can only be described as terror. The floor indicator shows floor 30. The lighting flickers a third time. Again, the camera briefly loses picture. When it returns this time, something is wrong with the image quality. There's a strange distortion, almost like static interference, around the edges of the frame. Sarah is still visible, but the image isn't as clear. She's backed as far into the corner as possible, both hands now covering her mouth, her whole body rigid. The floor indicator shows floor 35. Then the footage cuts to black. Not a flicker or a brief loss of signal. Complete black screen. The timestamp continues running. 10 seconds of black, 20 seconds, 30. At 47 seconds, the picture returns. The elevator is empty. Sarah, her suitcase, and her laptop bag are gone. The floor indicator shows 15. The elevator doors are closed. There is no sign that anyone was ever inside. 3 seconds later, the doors open onto the 15th floor hallway. The empty elevator sits there, doors open, waiting for passengers that don't come. After 30 seconds, the doors close and the elevator returns to the lobby, empty. I was doing my rounds on the 3rd floor when the call came through on my radio. It was Jennifer from the front desk, her voice tight with concern. "Marcus, we might have a problem. A guest's family is on the phone saying they can't reach her. She checked in about 2 hours ago, but she's not answering her room, phone, or her cell. The family says it's not like her." I told Jennifer I'd check it out and headed for the elevators. At that point, I wasn't particularly worried. Guests frequently went out for dinner or drinks after checking in without informing family members who might try to call. Cell phones died. People took showers and didn't hear the room phone. There were a dozen innocent explanations. I took the elevator to 11 and walked down to room 1117. I knocked firmly and identified myself as hotel security. No answer. I knocked again, louder. Still nothing. I used my master keycard and entered the room, calling out as I did so. The room was empty and showed no signs of occupancy. The bed was still made with the decorative pillows arranged exactly as housekeeping left them. The bathroom was unused. No luggage, no personal items, nothing to indicate that Sarah Chen had ever set foot in this room. I radioed down to Jennifer and asked her to double-check the registration. She confirmed Sarah had checked in, been given key cards, and assigned to 1117. I told her the room appeared unused and asked if Sarah had perhaps been given a different room by mistake. Jennifer checked the system. Only one reservation under Sarah Chen's name, only room 1117, assigned. That's when I started to feel the first flutter of unease. I went back to the security office and pulled up the footage. I watched Sarah check in, receive her key cards, and walk to the elevators. I watched her enter elevator 3. Then I switched to the hallway camera on the 11th floor to see when she had arrived. I fast-forwarded through the footage starting from when Sarah entered the elevator in the lobby. 5 minutes passed on the footage, 10 minutes, 15. Sarah never appeared in the hallway. She never exited the elevator on 11 or any other floor. I checked every floor, watching the hallway footage from each level. Nothing. It was as if Sarah had entered the elevator and simply ceased to exist. That's when I pulled up the internal elevator camera footage, and that's when I saw something that made my blood run cold. The impossible floor numbers, Sarah's growing terror, and then that final disturbing sequence. The flickering lights, the static, the blackout, and the empty elevator. I called my supervisor immediately. He arrived within 20 minutes and watched the footage himself. His face went pale. "Call the police," he said quietly. "This is way beyond us." The Seattle Police Department responded quickly once they understood the situation wasn't a simple missing person case. Detective Lisa Morrison arrived first, followed shortly by her partner, Detective James Park. I showed them everything. The check-in footage, the elevator footage, the empty room. I walked them through the timeline minute by minute. Detective Morrison was in her early 40s, a veteran investigator with a reputation for thoroughness. She watched the elevator footage 3 times without speaking, her expression growing more troubled with each viewing. When it finished the 3rd time, she turned to me. "Is this some kind of malfunction? Could the floor indicator be wrong?" I explained that we'd already checked. The elevator's computer log matched what the internal camera showed. According to every system we had, the elevator had climbed past the 15th floor and continued to floor 35, which was architecturally impossible. The building simply didn't have that many floors. The elevator shaft didn't extend that high. There was nowhere for the elevator to go. Detective Park asked the obvious question. Could the footage be faked? I told him I supposed anything was possible with enough technical skill, but I'd been working with these security systems for years and I'd never seen any indication they could be tampered with. Plus, why would anyone fake something this bizarre? Who would benefit? Morrison asked to see the mechanical room and the top of the elevator shaft. We went up to the 15th floor and took the service stairs to the roof access. The mechanical room was locked as always. I opened it with my key and we stepped inside. The room was exactly as it should be. Elevator machinery, ventilation equipment, electrical panels, all normal. The tops of the 4 elevator shafts were visible, sturdy concrete and steel construction with the elevator cables running up through the centers. We could see the top of elevator 3's car sitting idle below us. Everything looked completely ordinary. There was no hidden space above the elevator shafts, no secret floors, no way for an elevator to physically travel higher than 15, yet the footage clearly showed it doing exactly that. The police investigation expanded rapidly. By Sunday morning, the hotel was swarming with detectives, forensic technicians, and specialists I couldn't even identify. They interviewed every staff member who'd been working Saturday night. They pulled all security footage from every camera in the building. They examined Sarah's room with forensic detail, though there was nothing to examine since she'd never been there. They contacted Sarah's family in Portland, her employer, her friends, trying to build a picture of her mental state and any potential reasons she might have to disappear voluntarily. Sarah's parents drove up from Portland Sunday afternoon. I had to meet with them to explain what little we knew. Her mother was a small woman who kept twisting a tissue in her hands, her eyes red from crying. Her father was stoic and controlled, asking detailed questions about security procedures and camera placements. I showed them the footage, against the advice of the detectives, because I felt they deserved to see the last known images of their daughter. Mrs. Chen broke down completely when she saw Sarah's terrified face in those final seconds before the blackout. Mr. Chen watched in silence, his jaw clenched. When it was over, he asked me one question. Where did she go? I had no answer for him. The media got hold of the story by Monday. How they found out, I never knew. But suddenly there were news vans parked outside the hotel and reporters trying to sneak into the building. The management tried to keep things quiet, worried about the hotel's reputation, but there was no containing a story this strange. By Tuesday, it had gone national. The woman who vanished in a hotel elevator became a cable news obsession. Theories proliferated online. Some claimed it was evidence of parallel dimensions or portals to other realities. Others insisted it was an elaborate hoax or viral marketing stunt. Skeptics argued the footage had to be faked, though forensic video analysis found no evidence of tampering. The hotel's business suffered immediately. Guests checked out early. Conventions cancelled bookings. Nobody wanted to stay in a hotel where people vanished into thin air. Management brought in their own investigators, concerned about liability and desperate to find a rational explanation. The technical experts examined every inch of the elevator system, looking for malfunctions or anomalies that could explain what happened. They found nothing wrong. The elevators were old but well maintained and functioning exactly as designed. One theory that gained traction was that Sarah had somehow exited the elevator during the blackout period and the cameras had simply failed to capture it. But this theory had problems. First, the elevator doors never opened during that sequence. The internal camera would have shown light from the hallway if the doors had opened. Second, even if Sarah had somehow forced the doors open and exited onto a floor, the hallway cameras would have caught her. We checked every floor's footage during the relevant time period. Sarah appeared on none of them. Third, where did her luggage go? If she'd exited the elevator, why take her suitcase with her? Where could she have gone in the building without being captured on any of the dozens of security cameras? Detective Morrison told me privately that they'd considered the possibility that I or another staff member had somehow been involved in Sarah's disappearance. It was standard procedure to look at people with access and opportunity, but my alibi was solid. I'd been on camera in other parts of the building during the critical time period. Every staff member was similarly accounted for. Nobody had the access or the time to make Sarah disappear. By the end of the first week, the investigation had reached a frustrating dead end. Police had no evidence of foul play, no suspects, no viable theories that explained all the facts. Sarah had entered an elevator. The elevator had apparently traveled to floors that didn't exist. There had been some kind of technical anomaly with the recording, and then Sarah was gone. How and where remained complete mysteries. Sarah's phone records showed no calls or texts after she entered the hotel. Her credit cards hadn't been used. Her bank accounts showed no activity. She had simply vanished as completely as if she'd never existed. The FBI got involved, as they do with mysterious disappearances that might involve kidnapping across state lines. Special Agent David Richardson spent 2 weeks at the hotel, interviewing everyone again, reviewing all evidence, bringing in technical experts to examine the elevator and security systems. He was thorough and professional, but in the end, he had no more answers than the Seattle police. In a conversation I had with him near the end of his investigation, Richardson admitted this was the strangest case he'd encountered in 20 years with the Bureau. There's no evidence of what happened to her, he told me. None. It's like she stepped out of our reality and into something else. The hotel management eventually decided to decommission Elevator 3. They couldn't bring themselves to remove it entirely, as that would require major construction and possibly weaken the building's structure, but they shut it down permanently. The elevator sits there still, frozen at the lobby level, its doors locked, a silent monument to a mystery no one can solve. I quit my job at the Riverside Grand 6 months after Sarah disappeared. I couldn't work there anymore, couldn't walk past that elevator every day knowing what I'd seen. I took a job at a different hotel across town, but I brought the mystery with me in my head. I've spent years researching similar cases, looking for any pattern or explanation that might make sense of what happened. There have been other strange elevator incidents over the years. People who entered elevators and weren't seen exiting, brief time discrepancies that couldn't be explained, but nothing quite like Sarah's case, nothing with such clear documentation of the impossible. I've spoken with paranormal researchers, physicists, and psychologists. Everyone has theories, but no one has answers. Did Sarah somehow slip into a parallel dimension? Did she encounter some kind of temporal anomaly? Was there a technological explanation we simply lacked the knowledge to understand? Or is the simplest explanation the right one, that despite all evidence to the contrary, someone managed to abduct Sarah from that elevator through means we haven't discovered? 3 years after Sarah vanished, I got a phone call that changed everything. It was a Tuesday evening in May of 2016. I was at my apartment, watching television and trying not to think about the Riverside Grand or Sarah Chen or any of it, when my phone rang. Unknown number. I almost didn't answer, but something made me pick up. The voice on the other end was male, older, with a slight accent I couldn't quite place. He asked if I was Marcus Webb, former security supervisor at the Riverside Grand Hotel. I confirmed I was, my guard immediately up. The man identified himself as Dr. Raymond Torres, a professor of theoretical physics at a university I'd never heard of. He said he'd been following Sarah's case since it happened and believed he might have an explanation for what occurred. I'd received dozens of calls like this over the years, mostly from conspiracy theorists and attention seekers, so I was skeptical. But Dr. Torres sounded different, calm and professional, more interested in discussing possibilities than promoting wild theories. He asked if I'd be willing to meet with him to discuss the case in detail. Against my better judgment, I agreed. We met at a coffee shop near my apartment 2 days later. Dr. Torres was in his early 60s, grey-haired and professorial in appearance, exactly what you'd expect from a physics researcher. He brought a laptop and a folder full of papers covered in equations I couldn't begin to understand. He started by acknowledging how strange his theory would sound and asking me to hear him out completely before dismissing it. Then he began to explain something called quantum entanglement and the many worlds interpretation of quantum mechanics. I'll admit most of it went over my head, but the basic idea was that reality might not be as solid and singular as we assume. According to some interpretations of quantum physics, every possible outcome of every event actually occurs, just in different branches of reality that split off from each other. Dr. Torres suggested that what happened to Sarah might have been a quantum event, a moment where she somehow shifted from one branch of reality to another. The elevator, he proposed, might have acted as a kind of transition point, a place where the normal rules of physics temporarily broke down. I asked him why an elevator would be special in this way. He explained that it wasn't the elevator itself, but rather a combination of factors. The building's age, the specific electromagnetic fields from all the old wiring, the particular configuration of the elevator shaft and surrounding structure, maybe even something about that specific moment in time. All of these things together might have created conditions where quantum effects that are normally only observable at microscopic scales became briefly manifest at a macroscopic level. Sarah had the extraordinarily bad luck to be in exactly the wrong place at exactly the wrong moment when reality hiccuped. The floor numbers climbing past 15, Torres suggested, might have been the elevator's control system trying to make sense of something it wasn't designed to measure. The car wasn't actually moving to higher physical floors. It was moving through something else, some other dimension of space that our instruments interpreted as upward motion because they had no other frame of reference. When the footage cut to black and Sarah disappeared, that was the moment of transition, when she fully shifted into another branch of reality. In that other branch, Torres theorized, the building might have more floors, or it might not be a hotel at all. The physics could theoretically take Sarah anywhere, to any version of reality that branched off from ours at some point in the past. I asked Dr. Torres the obvious question, could Sarah come back? Could she shift back to our reality? He was honest with me. He didn't know. If his theory was correct, Sarah was alive somewhere, in some version of Earth that was similar to ours but different in ways large or small. She might be trying to find her way back. She might have succeeded in her reality, but we'd never know because she'd arrive in a different version of our reality, not this exact one. Or she might be permanently trapped, unable to recreate the specific conditions that caused her to shift in the first place. The theory was impossible to prove or disprove, which Torres freely admitted. He couldn't provide evidence, couldn't demonstrate the mechanism he was proposing. All he could offer was a theoretical framework that was at least consistent with known physics, even if it was highly speculative. I asked him why he was telling me all this. What did he hope to accomplish? Torres said he'd been collecting reports of similar incidents for years. People who vanished in enclosed spaces like elevators, tunnels, and caves. Places where the geometry was constrained and electromagnetic fields were often unusual. He believed these disappearances might all be related, all examples of the same quantum phenomenon occurring under specific conditions. He wanted to document Sarah's case thoroughly because the video evidence was unique. Most disappearances left no record of the actual moment of vanishing. Sarah's case had clear footage showing anomalous events leading up to her disappearance. Torres believed that if he could study enough cases, find enough commonalities, he might be able to predict where and when such events might occur in the future. And if he could predict them, maybe eventually science could learn to control them. Maybe someday people who'd vanished could be brought back. I appreciated his honesty and his obvious dedication to understanding what had happened, but I left that meeting feeling more unsettled than before. The idea that Sarah was alive but trapped in some parallel version of reality, forever unable to reach home, seemed almost worse than believing she'd died. At least death offered a kind of closure. This theory suggested Sarah might be alive and suffering, might be trying desperately to get back while her family mourned, separated by barriers that physics didn't yet know how to cross. Torres and I stayed in touch after that meeting. He'd call every few months to update me on his research or ask questions about details of Sarah's case. He never published anything formal about his theory. He told me the physics community would dismiss it as speculation without hard evidence, and he didn't want to damage his academic reputation. But he continued collecting cases, building his database, looking for patterns. In 2017, Torres called to tell me about another case that had just occurred. A man in Singapore had entered an elevator in an office building and never exited. Security footage showed the same kind of anomalies as Sarah's case. The elevator indicators showing impossible flaws, strange lighting fluctuations, and then an empty elevator. Torres was excited despite the tragedy. A second documented case with video evidence meant his theory might be more than just speculation. He planned to travel to Singapore to investigate. That was the last time I spoke with Dr. Raymond Torres. 2 weeks after that phone call, I learned that he died suddenly of a heart attack while on a flight to Singapore. He was 64 years old. His research, as far as I know, died with him. His university colleagues packed up his office, and his papers were archived somewhere, but nobody continued his work. His theory about quantum transitions and parallel realities remained unpublished and unknown outside the small circle of people he'd contacted. Meanwhile, Sarah's case slowly faded from public consciousness. The media moved on to new mysteries. The internet's attention span proved short. By 2018, you could barely find recent articles about the case. It became one of those strange, unsolved mysteries that people mentioned occasionally on forums dedicated to unexplained phenomena, but it no longer captured widespread interest. Sarah's parents never stopped searching for answers. Mr. Chen hired private investigators, consulted with experts in various fields, even brought in psychics and mediums despite his previous skepticism. Nothing helped. Mrs. Chen's health deteriorated badly. The stress and grief of losing her daughter without explanation took a terrible toll. She died in 2019 of complications from heart disease, and I've always believed that Sarah's disappearance was the real cause. You can die of a broken heart, even if the death certificate lists other reasons. I attended Mrs. Chen's funeral. It was small, just family and close friends. Mr. Chen looked like he'd aged 20 years in the 6 since Sarah vanished. After the service, he approached me and thanked me for coming. We stood together in the cemetery, two men bound by a mystery neither of us could solve, and he told me something I'll never forget. He said that sometimes, late at night, his phone would ring. He'd answer and there would be nothing but static on the line, but within that static, he swore he could hear Sarah's voice, faint and distorted, trying to say something he couldn't quite make out. He knew it was probably just grief and wishful thinking, his mind creating patterns in random noise because he wanted so desperately to hear from his daughter. But he couldn't stop hoping that maybe, somehow, Sarah was reaching out across whatever barrier separated them, trying to tell him she was alive and trying to come home. I didn't tell Mr. Chen about Dr. Torres's theory. It seemed cruel to give him hope that Sarah might be alive but trapped forever in some unreachable parallel world. Better to let him believe what he needed to believe, whether that was her death or her inexplicable survival. We all find our own ways to cope with the inexplicable. Mr. Chen died in 2021. I learned about it from a brief obituary in the Portland newspaper. Sarah was mentioned as his predeceased daughter. The obituary noted that the family requested donations to a missing persons non-profit rather than flowers. With both her parents gone, Sarah's case lost its most dedicated advocates. Her siblings still remembered her, still marked the anniversary of her disappearance, but life moves on, even when mysteries remain unsolved. I'm 52 years old now, still working in hotel security, though at a much smaller property than the Riverside Grand. 9 years have passed since Sarah Chen vanished, and I've tried to make peace with the fact that I'll probably never know what happened to her. The footage still exists, locked away in police evidence storage and backed up on servers that will probably outlast all of us. Someday, maybe decades or centuries from now, someone might review that footage and finally understand what it shows. Or maybe it will remain forever inexplicable, a digital ghost story that defies rational explanation. The Riverside Grand Hotel closed permanently in 2020 during the pandemic. The economic impact was just the final blow to a business that never recovered from the stigma of Sarah's disappearance. The building sat empty for over a year before being sold to a developer who planned to convert it into condominiums. I heard they were going to completely gut the interior, removing the old elevators and modernizing everything. Part of me was relieved. Maybe demolishing that elevator would somehow lay the mystery to rest. But another part of me felt like we were erasing evidence, destroying the last physical connection to what happened to Sarah. In the fall of 2022, I got an unexpected call from the demolition foreman working on the Riverside Grand conversion. He said they'd found something strange when they opened up the elevator shaft for number 3 and thought I should know about it. I drove over to the old hotel that afternoon. The building was barely recognizable inside, stripped down to concrete and steel, all the elegant old finishes torn away. The foreman, a gruff man named Eddie, led me to where they'd been working on the elevator shafts. They'd removed elevator 3's car entirely, and the shaft stood open and empty. Eddie pointed to something on the shaft wall at about the height where the elevator would have been when Sarah disappeared. There, scratched into the concrete, were words. Fresh scratches, not decades old, made with something sharp and done with desperate force. The message read, "Still here, can you hear me? Trying to get back, SC." The initials were Sarah's. The handwriting, as far as I could tell from crude scratches in concrete, looked similar to samples the police had collected from Sarah's hotel registration and other documents. I felt the hair rise on the back of my neck. Eddie asked if I knew what it meant. I told him about Sarah, about what had happened in that elevator 9 years ago. He listened with growing disbelief, then looked back at the scratches on the wall. "But that's impossible," he said. "The elevator car's been sealed shut for years. Nobody could have gotten into the shaft to write that. Even if they had, why would they write it at that specific height? You'd need to be standing on top of the elevator car to reach that spot." I had no answer for him. The message shouldn't exist, but it did. I took dozens of photographs, documenting the scratches from every angle. Then I called Detective Morrison, who'd long since moved on to other cases but had stayed in touch over the years. She came out to the site, examined the scratches, and arranged for forensic specialists to photograph and analyze them before the demolition continued. The analysis confirmed what we could see with our own eyes. The scratches were relatively recent, certainly not 9 years old, but also not brand new. They'd been made within the past few years, the experts estimated, though they couldn't be more precise than that. But how could that be? The elevator had been sealed and decommissioned. The building had been locked and alarmed. There was no way anyone could have accessed that shaft without triggering security systems and leaving evidence of entry. Unless, I found myself thinking, unless Dr. Torres had been right. What if Sarah had somehow been trying to reach back to our reality from wherever she'd gone? What if the message had appeared through some mechanism we didn't understand, scratched into the concrete from the other side of whatever barrier separated her from us? It was an impossible thought, but no more impossible than anything else about this case. Detective Morrison arranged for the section of wall with the scratches to be carefully removed and preserved as evidence. She reopened Sarah's case, though I'm not sure what she hoped to find. The message raised more questions than it answered. If Sarah was somehow still alive and trying to communicate, why this way? Why now? How could she physically affect our reality if she was trapped in another one? The media, of course, jumped on the story once word got out. The woman who vanished in a hotel elevator was back in the news cycle, now with an eerie epilogue. The message in the elevator shaft became the subject of endless speculation and debate. Skeptics argued it was an elaborate hoax, though they couldn't explain how the hoax had been executed in a sealed, monitored building. Believers saw it as proof of parallel dimensions, trapped souls, or other paranormal phenomena. I tried to stay out of the media circus this time. I'd given my statements to police and that was enough, but I couldn't stop thinking about the message. Still here. 3 words that suggested Sarah was conscious, aware, existing somewhere. Can you hear me? A question that implied she'd been trying to communicate before, that maybe those strange, static-filled phone calls Mr. Chen had received weren't just grief-induced hallucinations. Trying to get back. The most heartbreaking part. The suggestion that Sarah was actively attempting to return to us, to cross whatever barrier separated her from home. I wondered if she knew her parents were gone. Did time pass the same way wherever she was? Had it been 9 years for her too, or had she experienced something completely different? In the months that followed, I became mildly obsessed with researching similar cases. I tracked down Dr. Torres's archived papers through his former university and spent weeks reading through his notes. His database of disappearances in enclosed spaces contained hundreds of cases going back decades. Not all of them had the same characteristics as Sarah's case, but enough did to suggest a pattern. People vanishing in elevators, in tunnels, in cave systems, places where the geometry was constrained and electromagnetic fields were unusual. Torres had developed a mathematical model attempting to predict where such events might occur, based on building age, construction materials, local geology, and other factors. I'm no mathematician, but even I could see the model was incomplete and speculative. Still, it represented someone trying to bring scientific rigor to an apparently supernatural phenomenon. I contacted some of the other families Torres had interviewed, people whose loved ones had vanished under similar circumstances. Most didn't want to talk about it anymore. The wounds were too old and too painful to reopen, but a few were willing to share their stories. A woman in Ohio whose brother had vanished in a parking garage elevator in 1998, a man in Florida whose wife had disappeared in a hotel elevator in 2004. Each case had its own specific details, but the pattern was there. People entering elevators or similar enclosed spaces, strange malfunctions or anomalies occurring, and then the person simply gone without a trace. None of the other cases had video evidence as clear as Sarah's, which made her disappearance unique and uniquely frustrating. In 2023, exactly 10 years after Sarah vanished, I decided to write down everything I knew about the case, not for publication, but for myself. I needed to organize my thoughts, to see if documenting every detail might reveal something I'd missed. I spent months on the project, reviewing all the old footage, reading police reports I'd managed to obtain, interviewing people who'd been involved in the investigation. The document grew to over 200 pages of text, photographs, and analysis. When I finished, I had a comprehensive record of Sarah's case, but I still had no answers. The evidence remained contradictory and impossible. An elevator that traveled to floors that didn't exist, a woman who vanished from a sealed space, a message that appeared years later in a location no one could have accessed. It all defied rational explanation, yet it had all happened. I had the footage, the witness statements, the photographs of the scratched message. The evidence was real, even if understanding it remained beyond reach. I gave copies of my document to Detective Morrison and to Sarah's surviving siblings. Morrison thanked me and said she'd keep it with the official case file. Sarah's brother told me it was hard to read but important to have a complete record. He said their family had never stopped wondering what happened to their sister, and having all the information in one place at least gave them a full picture of the mystery, if not its solution. As I write this in late 2024, the Riverside Grand building has been fully converted into condominiums. People live there now, sleeping and eating and going about their daily lives in the same space where Sarah Chen vanished. The old elevator shafts have been sealed and converted into utility chases. The building has new elevators, modern ones with digital displays and smooth rides, and none of the quirks of the old machines. I wonder if the residents know the building's history. I wonder if they'd care. Most people don't believe in mysteries that can't be solved. They prefer rational explanations even when the evidence points elsewhere. I understand that impulse. I spent 17 years in security believing that every problem had a solution, every mystery had an explanation if you looked hard enough. Sarah's case taught me that some things might genuinely be beyond human understanding, at least with our current knowledge. I still work in hotel security, still watch monitors and patrol hallways and respond to guest concerns. But I watch elevators differently now. I pay attention to small anomalies, to lights that flicker for no apparent reason, to floor indicators that hesitate between numbers. Most of the time, it's just normal mechanical quirks. But sometimes, late at night when the hotel is quiet, I find myself wondering if somewhere in the machinery and electromagnetic fields and quantum uncertainties that surround us constantly, there might be thin places where reality is less solid than we assume. Places where the barriers between different versions of the world grow permeable, where someone unlucky or unfortunate might slip through. I've had nightmares about it over the years. Dreams where I'm in an elevator and the floor numbers start climbing past where they should stop. Dreams where the lights flicker and I know something impossible is about to happen. I wake up in a cold sweat, grateful to be in my bed, in my apartment, firmly anchored in this version of reality. I think about Sarah often. I picture her somewhere in some version of Seattle that's almost but not quite like ours, trying desperately to find her way home. Does she know that we've been looking for her? Does she understand that her disappearance devastated her family and haunted everyone who tried to help? Or is she trapped in confusion, unable to understand what happened to her or why nothing seems quite right in the world she now inhabits? The message in the elevator shaft suggests she's aware that she knows she's displaced and wants to return. That gives me a small measure of hope, though hope for what I'm not entirely sure. If Dr. Torres was right, if Sarah really did shift into a parallel reality, then bringing her back would require technology and understanding we don't possess. It might be centuries before humanity develops the physics knowledge necessary to bridge parallel worlds, if such bridges are even possible. By then, everyone who knew Sarah will be long dead. She'll be a historical footnote, a cold case from the early 21st century that future scientists might study if they ever develop the ability to detect and navigate between parallel realities. Or maybe I'm wrong. Maybe there's a simpler explanation I haven't considered. Maybe someone with knowledge and resources far beyond what I can imagine did something to Sarah, made her disappear through means that only appeared supernatural because I didn't understand the technology involved. Maybe the message in the shaft was an elaborate hoax, accomplished through methods the investigators couldn't detect. Maybe Sarah is dead and has been all along, and all the strangeness surrounding her case is just coincidence and misinterpretation of mundane events. I don't know which possibility is worse, that Sarah is gone forever, dead in circumstances we'll never understand, or that she's alive and trapped, scratching messages into concrete in the desperate hope that someone might hear her and find a way to bring her home. Detective Morrison retired last year. In one of our final conversations, she told me that Sarah's case was the one that would always bother her, the one she'd never been able to close in any meaningful way. She said she'd done everything possible, followed every lead, explored every theory. But at the end of it all, she had no more idea what happened to Sarah than she'd had on that first night when I showed her the impossible footage. Sometimes, Morrison told me, cases just don't get solved. Not because investigators aren't skilled or dedicated, but because the truth is either too well hidden or too strange to be accessible with our current methods and understanding. Sarah Chen's disappearance might be one of those cases that remains forever unsolved, a genuine mystery in an age that likes to believe all mysteries can eventually be explained. I've made peace with that possibility. Not everyone gets closure. Not every question gets answered. Life is full of loose ends and unresolved stories. Sarah's case is just one of millions. But it's the one that happened on my watch, in my hotel, while I was responsible for keeping guests safe. That's a weight I'll carry for the rest of my life. I failed to protect Sarah, even though I still can't imagine what I could have done differently. How do you protect someone from elevators that travel to impossible floors? How do you guard against reality itself malfunctioning? Last month, I had a dream about Sarah. She was standing in an elevator, but instead of looking terrified like in the footage, she looked calm and resigned. She turned to me and said, "I'm okay. Tell them I'm okay." It was just a dream, probably my subconscious trying to give me the closure I've never found in waking life. But when I woke up, I felt a strange sense of peace. Maybe Sarah is okay, wherever she is. Maybe she found a new life in whatever version of reality she ended up in. Maybe she stopped trying to get back because she realized it was impossible and decided to make the best of where she was. Or maybe that's just what I need to believe to live with this. If I had the chance to speak to Sarah's family now, this is what I would tell them. Your daughter, your sister, she didn't suffer as far as we can tell. The footage shows fear and confusion, yes, but not pain. Whatever happened to her happened quickly, and based on the message in the shaft, she might still be alive somewhere, still thinking of home, still hoping. That's not much comfort, I know. But it's better than nothing. I would tell them that everyone involved in the investigation did everything possible. The police, the FBI, the private investigators, the scientists and specialists who examined every aspect of the case. No one gave up easily. No one dismissed Sarah's disappearance as unimportant. She mattered to a lot of people, not just her family. I would tell them that their daughter's case might one day contribute to scientific understanding of phenomena we currently consider impossible. If Dr. Torres was right, if there really are quantum mechanisms that can shift people between parallel realities, then someday future physicists might look back at Sarah's case as an early documented example of such events. Her disappearance might help save others in the future. And finally, I would tell them that I'm sorry. Sorry that I couldn't protect their daughter. Sorry that the building I was responsible for became the site of such an inexplicable tragedy. Sorry that I don't have better answers for them after all these years. The Riverside Grand Hotel is gone now, transformed into something new. But the mystery of what happened there on February 9th, 2013 remains. Sarah Chen walked into an elevator and never walked out. Somewhere, in this world or another, her story continues. We just can't see it anymore. I hope, wherever she is, that she found peace. I hope the fear and confusion eventually faded. I hope she built a new life or found a way home that we simply haven't detected. I hope that someday, somehow, the mystery will be solved and Sarah's family will finally get the answers they deserve. Until then, all I can do is remember. Remember Sarah's face in that footage. Remember the impossibility of what I witnessed. Remember that reality is stranger and more complex than we usually allow ourselves to believe. Every day I go to work, I pass elevators, and every time, for just a moment, I think about Sarah Chen and wonder if today might be the day we finally understand what happened to her. But the elevators open and close normally. The floor indicators show only the floors that actually exist. People ride up and down without incident, never suspecting that in one hotel in Seattle, 9 years ago, an elevator became something else entirely, something impossible, something that stole a woman from the world and left behind only questions and a desperate message scratched into concrete. Still here. Can you hear me? Trying to get back. Those words haunt me more than the footage ever did, because they suggest Sarah is still conscious, still hoping, still fighting to return, and we have no way to reach her, no way to help, no way to bring her home. That's the worst part of this mystery. Not the not knowing what happened, but the possibility that we might know exactly what happened and be completely powerless to do anything about it. If Sarah did shift into a parallel reality, if she's alive and aware and trying desperately to get back, then she's been struggling alone for 9 years while we've been unable to help. That thought keeps me awake some nights, the idea that somewhere Sarah Chen is still fighting, still hoping, still believing that someone will find a way to bring her home. I wish I could tell her that we tried. I wish I could tell her that she wasn't forgotten. I wish I could tell her that her parents loved her until their last breaths, and that her siblings still remember her, and that I think about her case more than any other in my entire career, but I can't tell her any of that. The barrier between us, whatever it is, allows only the faintest hints of communication. A message scratched in concrete, static on a phone line, nothing more. so I write this account instead. I document everything, preserve all the evidence, maintain all the records, because someday, maybe long after I'm gone, someone might read this and understand. Someone might have the knowledge or the technology or the insight that we lacked. Someone might finally solve the mystery of what happened to Sarah Chen in that elevator. And if they do, I hope they find a way to bring her home. Or at least let her know that she was never forgotten, that her story mattered, that people cared enough to keep searching for answers, even when those answers seemed impossible to find. That's all any of us can hope for in the end, to be remembered, to matter, to leave behind evidence of our existence even if we ourselves disappear. Sarah Chen left behind more than most. She left behind a mystery that challenges our understanding of reality itself. She left behind a case that will puzzle investigators and scientists for generations. She left behind a story that makes us question everything we think we know about the nature of existence. And she left behind a message, still here. Can you hear me? Trying to get back. I hear you, Sarah. We all hear you. We just don't know how to answer.